You said that people were smiling and so on. I'm not sure they're going to be smiling when I'm finished. So let's talk about some of the markets and what's been going on. Yeah. I started off and said, let's do something for tonight. And I said, let's do yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Because sometimes to know where you're going, you've got to look back and see what happened in the past. Well, the last while, the guy on the right has been winning, and the guy on the left has been struggling. And it's all about risk and all about opportunity at the end of the day. A couple of years ago, when I was still significantly younger, 23 years, not quite that, we were eating at Villa San Giovanni. It's there at Wonderboom Airport. Many of you might have eaten there. Very nice restaurant. And this was before the days that old Giovanni built up that area outside where the kids are playing. There were just 3 swings there. And I was there, we were eating pizza that night, and my son was still very young at that stage. I think he was 3 or 4 years old, and I was pushing him on the swing. And next to us, there were 2 other kids on the swing, ages 6 and 8. And well, they were 2 busy little boys. They were going higher and higher and higher and higher. And there was this fence, this chain link fence with spikes on the top. And after that was where they parked the aircraft. And the 2 boys were going higher, and the younger one said to the elder one, "Why don't you try to make it across?" And I'm like, is this kid crazy? Does he know what the risk is? And his brother said to him, the elder one, "No, man, I'm not going to do it." And I'm like, thank goodness, sanity prevails. I don't have to call their parents. I don't have to do CPR when things go wrong. And the elder brother looked at the younger brother and said, "How am I going to get back?" And I think sometimes that's the big issue. We worry so much about risk and opportunities. I saw the risk, the other brother saw the opportunity of getting across. While the other one, he was realistic. He knew he was not going to be able to get back. So I think this is where we should start. In 2020 and 2021, we had a couple of things that happened in the world. We had COVID-19, a global pandemic, something which hadn't happened in about 100 years. I mean, one of the sights that stood with me was seeing dolphins swimming in the canals of Venice, just because the pollution ended and people were just staying at home. We had the 2 chaps on the right fighting a big presidential battle, and now suddenly the Democrats and the Republicans are farther apart than they've ever been. We saw the UK leaving Europe. We saw Brexit. And then obviously they had some issues because of that, but we'll get to that later. And then we had geopolitical issues as well in 2020 and 21. I mean, the chap at the top right said, no, it'll take a while for the Taliban to take over, and I think it was just a matter of days, and then they were sitting there. So what's the moral of the story? Uncertainty. And what has happened with uncertainty? Well, obviously we know when there's uncertainty and there's threats and things are going wrong, the markets go down, right? Not quite. So in 2020 and 2021, the markets went up quite a lot. If you were holding technology shares in rands, despite the little blip there that was called the COVID crisis, by the end of 2021, you were up over 115%. All the other markets, whether you look at the MSCI World, whether you look at the JSE, whether you look at the S&P 500, you would have done really well. This is despite all those bad things that were happening. But that was the start of our problems. What happened? COVID resulted in some inefficiencies coming our way. First of all, because a lot of people were just staying at home, there was not enough investment in energy. What happened? There was suddenly not enough supplies because people were locked down. The factories weren't working at an optimal level. Not enough shipping, not enough containers. You can go on. Not enough workers. One of the big things that happened was Brexit. Suddenly there were no Polish plumbers available or Czech truck drivers available in London anymore. Everything escalated. Suddenly not enough products in the stores. And when there's not enough products, what happens? Prices start going up. So our inflation problem that we're seeing in the world right now didn't just start overnight and didn't just start at the start of this year. This has started already in 2020 and 2021. That's where the root cause at the end of the day was. So what happened? We saw that shipping, for instance, became incredibly expensive. The Baltic Dry Index, which is a very good shipping cost gauge to look at, increased exponentially in 2021. Remember, when shipping becomes more expensive, the stuff that you buy in the store will also go up quite a bit. Commodities also went up. The CRB commodity index, which is a broad measure of a lot of commodities, increased quite a bit after the initial dip of March 2020. Again, if wood becomes more expensive, it becomes more expensive to build a house in the US. If coal becomes more expensive, electricity prices go up, and so on and so on. So we're sitting with a situation where commodities became a lot more expensive. What also happened, we only started feeling it really in the last year, but food prices really started picking up already in 2020 and 2021. If you look at the United Nations Food Price Index, you could see that in 2020 and 2021, after the initial COVID dip, food prices rose quite a bit. So this whole thing has been going on also for quite a while. Usually, however, it takes some time for that to flow through to hit your back pocket. While all this was going on, prices were going up, there was not enough truckers, shipping was becoming more expensive. What did central banks in the world do? They said, no, things are under pressure, there's a crisis. What is the one thing they do when there's a crisis? Yes, I know. They bring interest rates right down. This is essentially what happened. Whether it be in the US and whether it was in South Africa, we saw record low interest rates. So suddenly, you have all this money flooding the system, and you don't have enough goods to supply to people. Easy money, lots of goods, that creates a problem. And what we've seen in the world right now has got its root cause in the problem. So yesterday, the perfect storm was essentially forming. We saw all these inflationary pressures already building up in 2020 and 2021, and it's come home to roost. Now, today, this is where we are. This has been an interesting year, I think we can all say that. Yet we know a lot can happen in a year. What's happened so far? Just from a South African perspective, I mean, load shedding. A lot of you would have struggled to get here this evening with all the robots out in the bigger area. Now, this graph there on the left-hand side top is a couple of days old, so we're already over 2,000 hours of load shedding for the year so far. That's by far a record. We have never ever seen anything like this. Nothing prepared us for this. That's almost insane if you think about it. That's been bad for the economy. But then we also have a president who likes, apparently, to hide cash at a farm. Like most people who have farms obviously do, but I'm not sure about that. But anyway, that's not been a good look or a good feel for us as a country. Then we've got the scourge of youth unemployment. You know, I read some stats the other day that of people ages 15 to 24 in South Africa, around about 41% of them are not at school, not studying, or not working. That's a lot of people, a lot of young people who basically have no hope. And that is scary. And that's one of the big threats facing us at this stage. And then, of course, crime. I think most of us have been impacted by crime in the last couple of years. It is a big problem. So we're sitting with a bunch of problems here in South Africa. And then Russia invaded. We had all these things building up in 2020 and 2021 that's impacted markets. And then everything changed even more. What happened after this? One of the first effects that we saw was that food prices went ballistic. The price of sunflower oil went through the roof. The price of wheat went through the roof. Those are two basic necessities that a lot of people in the world depend on. They suddenly just became very expensive. We also saw energy prices going up. Brent crude oil went as high intraday as $130 from around about $85, $90 just before the invasion. Suddenly, filling up your car, which we have to do, became a lot more expensive. Energy as well, in terms of natural gas. Just in 2020 and 2021, it already went up a lot, and then suddenly it spiked beyond belief. It became, in the UK, it became a story of heating or eating. And that's scary if you think about it. A lot of people just couldn't afford it. They've had to put in price caps now there, just to make sure that it does not run away with the average consumer. So all of these things that are building up, what happens? People get worried. When people get worried, where do they run? They run to the dollar. They're not going to run here. So what happened to the US dollar? Well, initially, the rand strengthened there at the start of the year. Why? Commodity prices went up quite a lot, whether it be iron ore, whether it be platinum, they all went up. So the rand benefited from that. And then things got just a lot more real, little bit by little bit. And as it got more real, the rand started crumbling. It hit $18 against the dollar just a couple of days ago, and it's not looking that great. And that is also inflationary for us at the end of the day. So you're sitting with all these things. Shipping is becoming more expensive, food is becoming more expensive, energy is becoming more expensive. And it's not just been going on now, it's been going on for the last 2 years before this. However, what we know is we're not alone. This is not just a rand story, it's not just a South Africa story. If you look, the Japanese yen has actually performed worse against the US dollar than the rand has done. The South Korean won, the Swedish krona, they're all worse. So we're in good company, we're in select company at the end of the day. It's not something we did. This is just something that's happening in the world at this stage, and it will probably change at some point in time. What is the reality of today? The reality of today, and Dave touched on it, is inflation. We're seeing it, we're feeling it in our pockets, it's hurting us, and obviously it's hurting the markets. This year has shown me something which I had never seen in my life before. We're so used to seeing South African inflation up here, and US and UK and European inflation down to the floor. Now, for the first time, we're seeing that US and UK inflation is not just a little bit higher, but significantly higher than South African inflation. In fact, UK inflation is 10%. I mean, Margaret Thatcher would have turned over in her grave if she saw that at this stage. But it's a reality. Inflation has become a big, big problem in the world. So, what's the next step? Inflation goes up. What do central banks do? When there's trouble, they bring interest rates down. When there's inflation, yes, they take them up. And take them up they have. US Federal Reserve has increased interest rates at a pace that we have never seen in the last decades. The South African Reserve Bank, despite the fact that our inflation is high, but it hasn't run away with us, has also kept pace with the Fed, just to try to protect the rand. This is all a very spicy little drink that's been created. And when there's a spicy drink, what happens to markets? Markets start going down. So these are some indices from the start of the year, from 1st of January. And yes, it's not great reading. But I think you all know that. You are investors. You see it on your statements. But it's all good and well to look at yesterday. It's all good and well to look at today. At the end of the day, our focus needs to be on tomorrow. What's going to happen? Where are we heading? What are we going to do? Is there a light at the end of the tunnel that's just not a train? There is light. I think just like a young boy who decided to be realistic and knew he was not going to be able to get back, we need to be realistic as well. And we need to look at some things and say, but what's happening? What's changing? And what could change going forward? So what have we seen? We've already seen the last couple of months food inflation starting to come down. The UN Food Price Index has retreated quite a bit. Just in terms of that as well, I've already seen in terms of shopping in Checkers, where that little bottle of 500 milliliters of sunflower oil used to cost about 24 rands. It went up to 48 rands. It's now back down to 35 rands again. So it's starting to get better, bit by bit. But remember, it takes time. When there's a drop in prices, it takes time to feed through to the bottom line. Inflation expectations. We've already also seen that the Brent crude oil prices dropped significantly. It's back to the levels of earlier this year. This should in time also be good for lower inflation. We've already also seen the natural gas prices. After that big spike that we saw in August, September, which had everybody hysterical, we've seen that also come up a bit. Remember, it's still elevated, it's still high, it's still a problem. Don't get me wrong, but at least it is a bit better. While looking at that, I want to look at shipping rates as well. Shipping rates have also normalized to the longer term mean. What does all of this mean? It means it's easier to ship, food prices are starting to come down a bit, energy and gas prices are starting to come down a bit. A lot of these things are going to be good, so the inflation expectations should be lower. But is this just me talking, or is this what other people feel as well? Well, if you go and look and you read up and see what the New York Fed is doing and what a bunch of other guys are saying, they expect inflation in the US to drop to 2.8% next year from the current elevated closer to 8%. Will that make a difference? Yes, it will. They expect it also to normalize after that. If that happens, we should see interest rates and the hiking in the interest rate cycle also start to ease off a bit. And at some point, they're going to start cutting again. When they do cut, that should be good for markets. So, at the end of the day, it's very easy to say, but should we wait? There's still so much uncertainty. Should we not just pull our money and put it in money market? Ride out the storm. I've found it not to be a good thing to do. And I think most of you would agree. Just a small story there. The JSE All Share Index bottomed at 38,000 on the 19th of March 2020. Strangely enough, on the 19th of March, you could still buy booze. You could still buy ciggies, or chuf, as some people call it. And you could still buy open shoes at that stage. Well, I didn't have a need for it at that stage, but you could still buy it, technically. And then on the 23rd, Cyril spoke to us and he said to us, we're locking you all up. And on the 26th, he locked us up. But interestingly enough, like I said there at the top, the market bottomed already on the 19th, where you could still buy all these things. By the end of April, when we were still in a hard lockdown, remember, he had 4 weeks, and then he came on TV again and he said to us, you're remaining under house arrest. And my wife walked in after an afternoon nap and said to me, what did he say? I said, we're still being locked up. And she said, fantastic. She turned around and she went back and had a further nap. I think a lot of people did at that stage. But the market had recovered by the end of April, while we were still locked up, to 50,000 on the All Share Index. That's a 30% increase in the market, while things were still technically extremely bad. In December 2020, what happened? The second wave hit us. That was bad. But strangely enough, despite that, the index level was 59,000 at the end of December. Markets look ahead. Markets do not dwell on the past. They look forward. We can easily look at the inflation figures now and say to each other, oh, it's bad. We can look at the interest rates and say it's bad. But markets tend to think forward. And they can see, and a lot of other people can usually see when things are going to go up. We've already seen over the last couple of days, despite some bad news flow still, we've seen the markets picking up a bit. That's part and parcel of it. So don't get ahead of yourself. During the global financial crisis of 2008-2009, the JSE All Share Index fell to 18,000. That was bad. I remember that specific day being in the office and thinking to myself, this isn't good. South African GDP, we went into a recession, but the GDP only started growing again in the first quarter of 2010. Now remember, that only gets announced around about July of 2010. But by the end of 2009, while we were still in a recession and there was no hope in sight, the JSE All Share Index had recovered 50%. So markets usually react before the fact. Currently what's going on is people are too negative. The slide on the left, or the graph on the left, shows you the amount of short positions in the market by US money market funds and hedge funds. They were so negative, they sold off so much. And that's one of the reasons why the market went down so much. But Like any good bear market, it eventually turns. On the right-hand side is a list of bear markets. And they look terrible. If you look at the bear market in October 2007, it fell by 57%. But the bull market that followed from March 2009, 401% that it grew by. So you get these things. Currently, we've seen that the S&P 500 is down about 25% already in this current cycle. That's big. That's a big drop. Could it drop further? Maybe. Maybe not. But when it recovers, and it invariably does, it'll be a good time to remain in the market. So yes, we should stop looking at December's figures. December, the markets were elevated. Everything was good. Everything was high. And subsequently, we look at it and we think to ourselves, I've lost so much money since December. But if we just stop for a moment and we look back at yesterday, and we look back at 1st of January 2020, we'll see that the investments are still significantly higher than they were on the 1st of January 2020. And this is despite all the turmoil in the world over the last 2.5 years. So I think be realistic. So what keeps me awake at night, except my children? Well, we live in uncertain times. There's the war going on. China is scoring own goals left, right and center with their zero COVID policy. If somebody coughs in Beijing, then suddenly the whole world gets locked up there. You're going to struggle to grow your economy like that. I'm also worried about global central banks overshooting in terms of these interest rate hikes that they're busy doing. That is a concern. Hopefully they keep their heads together. There's also a great reset coming in the UK mortgage market. So if you wondered, UK mortgages are only fixed for a couple of years, and then suddenly it resets to the interest rate of the day. A lot of guys have interest rates of 2% at this stage. So from next year on, a lot of them, about 1.8 million mortgages, home loans in the UK, are going to reset to around about 6%. That's a lot of money out of your pocket, especially when food is more expensive, especially if electricity is more expensive. Now suddenly your house is also costing you a lot more. That is a concern. And on the local side, we've got Eskom. I don't need to say anything about that. And then we've got water. There's now water shedding going on in Joburg and even here in Pretoria as well. And then the ANC also worries me. I'm not going to delve too deeply into that. I think they worry us. And then unemployment and demographics, and then crime. But what gives me hope? There are opportunities always out there, even when markets are weak. The rand should be better going forward. This time next year, all else being equal, you'll probably see the rand closer to 15.50. Why? It's just too weak. The dollar is just too strong. It cannot hold. You will see a normalization taking place. When that happens, we will also see lower petrol prices. We will also see lower food prices. Later in next year, we might well even start seeing interest rate cuts again. That's going to stimulate things. The most important, however, for me is valuations are quite cheap. The JSE All Share Index is currently trading at a PE level that we haven't seen in the last 20 years except for the global financial crisis. That's how cheap the market locally is at this stage. Even the S&P 500 in the US is not expensive looking back at over the past couple of decades. So I think when you know that valuations are cheap, don't be silly. Be realistic, diversify, and do your thing. We will be okay.